Now, we learned from the G20 that it's going to be okay because the IMF is going to be given a lot more money, and this will be made available to countries that run into trouble as a result of a financial crisis that's external to them. But on the evidence so far, this is likely to be conditional on countries pursuing the same old policies that the IMF has pushed countries to pursue in the past, as they did in the Asian financial crisis, which is to cut public expenditure and to privatise services. So that for me is a cause for concern. There's another piece of research that I'm doing that tries to investigate in more detail that. But I can't help feeling that in terms of this business of ensuring a supportive macroeconomic framework, we've rediscovered Keynesianism for the rich, but for the poor, it's very much neoliberalism as usual. Well, can we do anything about that? Can we, in fact, increase the fiscal space that's open to poor countries to address the issues I've identified? And can we improve the use of that fiscal space? Because obviously, if you've got more fiscal space, but then you spend it all on more guns or better palaces for the president, it's not going to address the issues I've identified. But can we think about changing the conditions that are attached to IMF loans so that there is maintenance of public expenditure to combat the recession and support human development? Maintaining aid flows, I think, in the UK, for instance, so far, both the government and the major opposition parties have committed to maintaining aid flows, but this time next year, I'm not at all confident that that will still be the case. And some donors have already started reducing. So maintaining aid flows, increased tax revenue, very interesting work going on now under the headline of tax justice, saying, well, one reason why countries have got no fiscal space is actually it's rather hard for them, made rather hard for them to collect enough tax revenue because of the existence of tax havens. So measures to try and get rid of tax havens and introduce new international taxes like currency transaction taxes. And then design gender-responsive budgets and recovery plans. I have no time to go into any detail of this, but what this is really about is enabling women to have more voice in the way that taxes are raised and money is spent in their countries, and to monitor how their governments are responding to the crisis and any kind of recovery plans that are being put in place. There's a lot of work in many parts of the world doing this, but a lot of it has been at the local level or at the level of individual programs. A big challenge now to get some of that work to focus more on these issues of recession, crisis, and response to it. So just my last thought then, that from my point of view, a gender perspective on the crisis doesn't mean focus only on women's loss of employment. Men lose jobs too, men are also being hard hit by the crisis in many ways. But I think it does mean recognising the impact on unpaid work as well as paid work and encouraging responses that reduce and redistribute this kind of work. Let me stop.
Thank you, Diane, for that very provocative and very stimulating lecture. We've got some time for questions from the audience. I'd like to think that this has generated lots of opportunity for people to think about questions they want to ask, so I open the floor to questions.
I think that's an excellent point, and it's an excellent example of how the unpaid work intensifies the recession. Yeah, you dismiss your maid, send her back to the countryside, and then the recession spreads to a rural family there.
Girls are dropping from school. I was in a conference just like a week before coming to Canada about how girls are being way more exposed to sexual work since the past 2 years. The homicide crisis having increased, and what's happening is that violence, it's a way of gaining power right now. Because people are getting money out of violence. People are extortioning people. You have to pay rent wherever you live. Like 5 blocks from my house, there's a market, and all of the sellers are having to pay something. A woman working inside our neighborhood who had a place where she sells food every night. She was asked to pay a rent or else she would be killed, and she stopped working. So, like, you can clearly see that. And yeah, those were my comments. And now, when you were suggesting things for increasing the fiscal space, you mentioned aid. Would it really help the country to have an increase of aid? If it's bilateral?
That's a very good question. I have different views about the short run and the long run implications. So I think in the long run, it's really important that we shouldn't have a dependency. That the country should be able to develop and grow. So in ways that CEDA and DFID and all these aid agencies become redundant. I'm sorry, that might mean fewer jobs. But I think as a long run, that's what we should be working towards. Against that, we've just set a short run situation where prices of imports are going up, so you need more foreign exchange. One of the reasons is rise in the food market, but also devaluation has been another response to the crisis in quite a few countries, pushing up the price of imports. It's very important that the aid shouldn't have onerous conditions. This is a problem with the IMF money. We need, essentially what we need is, just like I've argued for cash transfers and to poor families, is a crisis response. I think we need to have cash transfers to poor countries. In other words, grants rather than loans. And so the aid mix needs to be changed to address the contours of the crisis. But then, I think you're absolutely right, in the longer run, we want to see countries developing in ways that reduce their dependency on aid. That, of course, means you're going to have a lot of changes in the international economy as well, which I didn't talk about. We didn't talk about trade, we didn't talk about the new global financial architecture. But yes, we have to, another dimension of this supportive macroeconomic framework is to change international finance and trade in ways that enables countries to develop strategies for development that mean they're not going to be dependent on aid in the future. I think the issues you've raised about violence are really important and interesting, because I think there's multiple kinds of violence that we may see more of. There's, if you like, the informal domestic violence, so the informal violence, male on male in the street, the informal male on female violence in the family, and the organized violence, the gangs that are doing what they're doing in El Salvador. So if you like, the organized crime growing and as a way of extracting money from people. And yes, the point you raised about will this be seen as an indication that so many of these developing countries are conflict-ridden and unstable? However, I don't think the rich countries have any capacity to do any more interventions. So there may be that sort of impression generated, but I would be sceptical that will be a pretext for any more interventions, because I just don't see the capacity to do that. On issues of the sex trade and additional female, certainly on the sex trade, this is not just an issue though that's pertinent to developing countries.